talk about before you joined, George. Um, and you mentioned the NHLPA and the reluctance of a general manager to get involved in sharing learning. In our era, in your time at the university, you were one of the leaders in initiating the passing on of information. So Tom and I talked about the university classes and the guest coaches you brought in and the impact it had. I went to two of the sessions and I was absolutely blown away. Tom went to all nine of the sessions. So,
Yeah.
George, can you
Of
talk a
course he
little
did.
bit about how did that come about? What inspired you to do it? Uh, did you know at the time that we weren't in the stream of the developmental game that was happening in the rest of the world?
Well, let me go back. With the Alberta Golden Bears, I had a wonderful coach that I met in grade 11 of high school. And in grade 10 of high school, I met Murray Smith. And then Murray Smith and Claire Drake went to the University of Alberta. I declined scholarships to go down to three schools because I couldn't get architecture or physical education. But I basically landed on phys ed because I enjoyed what Claire Drake and Murray Smith did every day. And so I played hockey for Claire, but I didn't make the team the first year because players were coming back from Eddie Shore. And that was Vic Zerko and Vern Bahal and unbelievable players. There were about seven of them. And so there I was. I played basketball for the University of Alberta for my first year. And the second year, then I made the hockey team, and that was my love. But if you're going to Google me, please Google William George Hardy. W.G. Hardy. There's the Hardy Trophy. And for most of us, the Hardy Trophy was more important than the Stanley Cup because it was all amateur hockey. William George Hardy, I encountered in my second year of university when I took a classics course. In my third year of university, I took two classics courses from William George Hardy. And he's in the Alberta Sports Hall of Fame, and I'm not sure there should be more. Because if you look at a lifetime of achievement, mine pales, I think everyone else pales by comparison to all the things he did for amateur athletes, negotiating with the National Hockey League, working with the International Ice Hockey Federation. He was my stimulus to go out into international hockey, which I did in 1971 for 5 months. Before the 72 series, I spent 6 weeks in the Soviet Union as the guest of Anatoly Talasov and a couple other people. But the bottom line is, I was certainly interested in the outreach. As a farm boy in Saskatchewan, Al, I could see my dog run away for 3 days. And so I thought the perspective was that there was another world out there, and I was very curious. And so that was my start. And I came back and I tried to share my knowledge. If I hang my hat on anything, it's that the coaching association was preceded by the initiative to have national coach certification. In Canada, we would license dog catchers, but we wouldn't license coaches and managers and people leading youth sport, amateur and kids sport. And for me, it was a different journey than Claire Drake or most coaches. I moved myself into administration. And in that administration, I tried to be an influencer through the Coaching Association of Canada, through setting up Association of University Coaches. And mostly, I'm going to say, one day I went to Claire Drake and I said, Claire, you're really interested in high school hockey. I've got 8 coaches who will put together high school teams, but I would like you to do a clinic. This was 1962. And Claire looked at me and he said, no. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, it was dumbfounded. And then he said, unless you and Dick Wintermute do presentations. So 1962 was the first clinic I got involved with Claire, and that became an Alberta, then a BC, and then Canada. The program that basically Claire and I wrote became the International Ice Hockey Federation go-to clinic. And so that initiative, I hang a hat on coaching certification and coach education through to the National Hockey League Coaches Association. So if there's anything you want to Google, I think the most significant thing is I had the opportunity to work with the best players in the world in the National Hockey League, but I also had to work with the best coaches in the world. And annually at the University of Calgary, we brought in every sport, top people in sports psychology, sport physiology, biomechanics, and then every coaching discipline. And so there's where I would say, if you want to Google, you may not pick up what I think was significant. Thank you, Wally.
George, much appreciated. And I don't know if Tom's still on, but
Yeah.
he,
Hi, Tom.
Hi, George. Good to see you.
Good to hear your voice, man.
and for the sake of the public out there, which we are all much older than, Tom, can you just mention the presenters that did George's clinic? And then, George, I'm going to get you to talk about each of them and that experience. Tom, you run through that list again.
Well, Ludek Bukac, who was coaching Czechoslovakia, he came twice. And that was really eye-opening because, to hear how different people played, because we never heard that in Canada. And then Werner Pearson, who was a real innovator from Sweden, and Hans Lindberg, coach of Canada Cup, and Kjell Larson, and Roger Nielsen. And one year, I think, George, you did it about Russian hockey and had some other Canadian coaches come in with you. And then that's how I met Johanny Walston. That really influenced my coaching life because I hooked up with him for years and we did programs together. And I don't know if I missed anybody there.
No, let me just follow up by saying, in 1971, I spent 6 weeks in Moscow while the team was training for the 72 series. And I had saunas and vodka and everything else that went along with being with Anatoly Tarasov. At any rate, Lou Harrell probably outdid me in that one. But the bottom line is, it was an education to talk through an interpreter and to pick his brain, because there he was with all of the mass participation in ice hockey out on whatever ice surface they could do. The most efficient nation was Czechoslovakia, then Czechoslovakia. And the primary guy that I wired into was Ludek Bukac. And he was an innovator. He coached Sparta Prague. He was the national team coach. And he was part of the efficiency. They had 5 arenas that were in the whole of Czechoslovakia. Their development program started at age 5, 6 by identifying talent based on what the parents might have been as athletes. And then they were selected into the different sports. Now, that was very common in Sweden and Finland and then the Soviet Union, also China. I went to China in 1972 when Richard Nixon opened up ping pong or table tennis diplomacy. And we spent 39 days there. So for me, my field was international and comparative physical education, sport, recreation, and philosophy and current issues and all that type of thing. But the bottom line was that hockey was my love. And then off to Finland, Juhani, and I'm going to say Finland, with 4 million people at that time, were the most innovative and continue to be so. And, about 7 years ago, every team at every level has a goaltender practice once a week. Is it any surprise why we have so many Finnish goaltenders in the National Hockey League? And then you look at Sweden, and Sweden were, the big brother in many respects. And I probably spent 2 years in the Soviet Union in total, a year in Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Czechia, and then a year in Sweden and a year in Finland. By the time I did what I was a hockey ambassador. I was pissed off with Canadian hockey's reputation, only for fighting, only for tough. But what they wanted to learn from me was, where did Canadian players get heart? Where did American players get heart? And the heart came from the long road trips, getting kicked off buses because they lost a game in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan, where I grew up. And you toughened up and you played till the 60-minute. Ultimately, that paid off for Canada to eke through the 72 series with last minute every time. But the bottom line is that the last minute, I think, has become more of a last minute for Canadian hockey because the development might of the United States is taking over. And there are more players and more competition in the Soviet Union, except that we only see the occasional player now that bucks the trend and comes to the National Hockey League or is allowed to do so. But there was much to learn from Sweden, Finland, Czech Republic. And in 1935, there was a Canadian that started Czech hockey on its route. And so, there was a precedent, if I could put it that way. Talking to William George Hardy was the kind of stimulation that sent me on my journey. Enough. Thank you, Tom. And thank you for what you've done to hockey. It's great.
Oh, appreciate it, George.
George, I'm just not sure if you're familiar with how Tom, after he met Juhani, he was been one of Juhani's best friends over time. And Tom,
I knew that. Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about Juhani and your relationship and his influence on you?
Well, very early, I would say probably at the very start of my travels in 1971. And it may have been at a game in Sweden before that I met Juhani, because the rivalry between Finland and Sweden is historic, as is Czechoslovakia and the Soviet Union. And Juhani, I believe, I met at one of the cup games, might have been 1968. I'm not quite recalling that. But from that time on, Juhani was one of the people in Finland that I talked with a lot. And Tom, I know you've collaborated very successfully with Juhani in publishing and making a real presence in international hockey, and that's to be complimented. And I think that the more generally that we can be ambassadors for our game or attempt to be that, I felt that that was what I was doing. I was trying to say that there was a Quebec group, Gaston Marcotte, Georges Lariviere. I'm going to name probably 8 or 9 other coaches, but they were a think tank. And then with Claire Drake and Dave Andrews, who went on to be the president of the American Hockey League, and Dale Henwood and others, we formed a think tank in the West. And Wally participated in, Tom, you did. And in that think tank, we shared information, and there were, we competed like hell against each other, but then we had a beer after and we shared clinics. And so, the whole sharing of information was anathema to the National Hockey League because they wanted to have their own propriety. But my view of the National Hockey League is, of course, it's a business. I'm sorry that I wasted a lot of my coaching time in the National Hockey League because I kept developing players to go to another team to win the Stanley Cup. And even though I started the first year with Bob Murdoch and Drew Remenda with San Jose, we had players playing 17 years later. Why? Because we went in and we tried to teach the game and make every player aware of what role he could be successful in. And so that was the business of hockey. And my contribution to the players was simply identifying who you could be, wanted to be, and then I would work with you and spend time with you off the ice to try to make sure that you were successful in your business career. And so I was a business-like coach, but very much a player's coach. And it was a frustration. I want to contrast that. I worked in, I believe, 7 nations. Gentlemen, if someone travels 4 hours to go on the ice at 11:15 at night, travels to practice for 90 minutes, and then drives home 4 hours, do you think they might love the game? That was Mexico. I worked in Lithuania, the same kind of story model. You want to go where you love the game, the athletes love the game. And the road less traveled has been, I think, a road that my wife said, okay, well, what's the next road we're taking? Where are we off to, But she was curious about the world, and I left the university as a full professor, had been acting dean, associate dean, and I had to call out the president for sexual assault in our building. And he was on the selection committee for the next dean. So I buggered off. I was out of there because we wanted to explore the world. And then I came to the Minnesota North Stars in 1988-89. And unfortunately, that was a franchise that had been run into the ground, as you probably knew. Lou Lanny was a good hockey man, but the other general managers would phone him in the first period to talk to Lou, the intermission. And then they'd phone him in the second period because they knew Lou would get so pissed off with his players that he would be talking trade. And so over time, unfortunately, Minnesota, even though they joined with an American league and potential world hockey, the franchise went down. We at least made the playoffs in 88, 89. But I left there because every day the players came in and said, "What are you here today, George? Where are we going? Where are we going?" You know, and there were great players there. Nobody better than Craig Hartsburg. Brian Bellows was an athlete that apparently was a coach killer. He wasn't with me because I went to him one day. I said, "Can I buy you lunch? I just want to talk to you about a few things." And I said, "You're having trouble, you know, and getting frustrated with not scoring goals." So we talked for half an hour. I gave him a couple ideas, and they went back, and it helped him. And then that helped with Neil Broughton and helped with others. Getting to key players at the National Hockey League was the same as getting to key players in every team you coach. Know who the guys are that you can enlist. And as Fred Shiro said one time, you got to keep away the 9 guys that hate you by having 9 guys that help and like you, and the 5 guys are in the middle. Those are the guys you have to work on. Start there. At any rate, that's the business of hockey. And the business was